Tonight's case takes us to 1929 in Dusseldorf, a city that is minding its business, trying to recover, just trying to live, when suddenly people are turning up, stabbed, bludgeoned, strangled, and in some cases left like someone was trying to make a statement. There was no pattern, there was no type. Men, women, children, all of them seemed to be fair game to this monster. These attacks were random, they were savage, and they were so over the top violent that even the police started asking themselves, could this be the work of multiple killers? Because surely one person can't be doing all of this, right? Wrong. Because what was stalking the streets of Dusseldorf, it wasn't some phantom, it wasn't a gang of criminals, it's one man who quietly blends in, who goes to work, who comes home, who acts normal, all whilst hiding the kind of urges that don't belong in a human being. And of course the press, they give him the most dramatic nickname imaginable, the Vampire of Düsseldorf. And the worst part is that this monster, it doesn't just want to kill, he wants fear, he wants chaos, and he wants the attention. And when the city is finally at its breaking point, he would start leaving clues as though it was some twisted little scavenger hunt. So buckle up, because Peter Kürten isn't just a killer. He is the kind of case that makes you sit there afterwards just thinking, how did nobody see this coming? Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you are new here. I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Oh yeah. If you are new here, hi, my name is Anna. I am a certified yapper. One day I decided I'm going to hop on the internet, I'm going to hop on YouTube, I'm going to yap about true crime. And now, somehow, I find myself doing it twice a week, every single week on a Wednesday and Sunday. Now, with that being said, if true crime is your jam, then I would highly suggest that you subscribe, you get the notification bell on, because, well, like I said, I'm here for you twice a week, every single week, and it's free. If you're a regular here, if you are an OG, then you already know the damn drill. Get down in the likes, get down in the comments, make sure you're still subscribed, make sure the bell is still on, and if you please, if you could leave some hype points, if you could hype this video for me, it would mean the world. It does wonders on YouTube. It helps boost me out to the YouTube algorithm, helps grow this wonderful community that we are building together. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I can all be found listed down below. Social media handles, Instagram, TikTok, products used on my face today, case suggestion form, resource links that you might need. You'll be glad to know that I am on the recovery end of this chest infection. My voice is well and truly back. There might be some coughs. There might be the odd occasion where I have to stop and blow my nose. There might even be a time where it sounds like I have a frog in my throat, but best believe me, we're getting this video filmed today. But I think I've said everything I need to say. Oh, actually, just one more thing. Anytime I do a makeup video and it's a look that's a bit crazy, there's always one guy in the comments who tells me, Anna, you look like a clown. I don't like this makeup on you. Well, my love, I'm here to tell you the makeup is not for you. It's for me. And for the people who enjoy seeing it being done. Makeup's creative, it's a bit of art, and do you know what? It actually washes off at the end of the day. So if you're offended by that, if you don't want to see this clown with the makeup on, don't watch, okay? Great. Anywho, on that note, without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the horrifying, disturbing, weirdo loser case of Peter Kürten, also known as the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Listen, I don't know how or why I feel this way, but when I look at Peter Kürten, I just imagine that this man has the same scent as an old basement. It's given musty, fusty, crusty, dusty. And he thought he was like this terrifying monster, and yet, when I look at him, all I really see is someone who looks like a sleep-deprived accountant who hasn't yet discovered soap. The guy needs a good wash, by the looks of it. So, the scumbag, he was born on May the 26th of 1883, which in my opinion, makes this homicidal history. That's right, homicidal history. You've been wanting a homicidal history for the longest time, and you've also wanted Peter Kürten covered for the longest time, so I came in clutch. I came through. Now, there is absolutely no denying that Peter Kürten, he was born into a family of chaos. There was financial struggles, and I mean, they were in the gutter. You know, poverty stricken. It was bad. But I'd say the worst thing of all about Peter's childhood was the sick and twisted predator that called himself Dad. Now, Peter, he was the eldest sibling. He was the eldest son of 13 children. And can I just add that these 13 children all lived in a one-bedroom apartment. You couldn't swing a frickin' cat in here, but there was 13 kids. 2 of his siblings, however, they would pass away at a very young age, leaving just 11 siblings, and then the mother and the father. Now, both his mother and father, they really struggled with alcoholism, but Daddy Kürten in particular, he was a monster. And we can't even just say that the alcohol made him this way, because the kind of things he did cannot be blamed on alcohol. He would often beat his wife and children, especially when he was drunk, but it was also something that he did when he was sober. Anytime he touched an alcoholic beverage, if he sniffed a beer, his temper just seemed to double. He was riled up over absolutely nothing. And as horrific as it is to be beaten by your own father, to not feel safe in your own home, this wouldn't even be the most horrific thing to take place in that apartment. Kürten's father, when he was drunk, he would order his wife and children into the one room, and he would basically have them rolled up. He would then force his wife to undress in front of him, in front of the children, and then he would force his children to watch as they had sex in front of them. And I mean, that in itself, I can't even imagine the trauma that would inflict onto children. But again, even this wouldn't be the worst thing that happened in this house. Because Peter Kürten's eldest sister, she would receive the absolute worst of this abuse. Because their father, he would repeatedly rape his daughter. And the scumbag, thankfully, he would be arrested, but there is no justice in this, because when he is convicted and sentenced, he is sentenced to 18 months. 18, 1-8, in case my accent is distorting it. That is no justice for repeatedly raping your daughter. And do you know how I said she was the eldest daughter? She was 13 years old, 1-3, 13, and she was being raped by her own father. There is absolutely no justice in that sentence whatsoever. So shortly after him receiving his sentence, Peter's mother, she would file for a separation order, and during this time it was a real struggle for the family. I mean, they were struggling already. They were riding that struggle bus every single day, but the poverty only got worse. They had lack of food, lack of water. It was an awful, awful time. Now later she would go on to remarry, and things seemed to be stable for her, and then she eventually moved to Dusseldorf. And I have to say, right, we can't deny that what Peter Kürten went through as a child wasn't traumatic, because it absolutely was. That trauma is going to stay with you. And for his child self, the one who couldn't protect himself, who couldn't do anything about his circumstances, we can sympathise and empathise. We're allowed to do that. We can feel for the child he was when he had no control over that situation. But see, as soon as these freaks start to commit their own acts of evil that are completely and utterly unwarranted, that have no justification whatsoever, any sympathy and empathy that we have for them goes out the frickin' window and into the fire. And let me tell you, Peter Kürten only had to be 5 years old for that sympathy to leave me. In 1888, Peter Kürten, he tries to drown one of his fellow playmates. And if my math is mathin', from 1883 to 1888 is 5 years, making him 5 years old. And it doesn't stop there. 4 years later, and again, quick math here, but I'm assuming the age of 9, he starts to go out with the local dog catcher. And I don't mean like dating, he just goes out his house and walks around with the local dog catcher. But this dog catcher, when he caught animals, he would usually torture them and murder them. And at the age of 9, Peter Kürten would start doing the very same. And there was no horror, there was no shock, there was no upset from this young boy. He seemed to love it. He seemed to thrive in it, and actually, he seemed to be more sadistic than the first person who was doing it. Now, we will see as the case goes on that sometimes Mr. Kurten, Mr. Drapes, he can fantasize and exaggerate a story, and it's believed that he exaggerated and fabricated this area because he tries to claim that his murders actually started when he was a young child. He claimed that he murdered 2 classmates at the age of 9 years old. But I mean, honestly, who's to say? Because the only witness to this is Kurten himself. And there was no reports that 2 children went missing and were found dead or weren't found at all. So I mean, he is definitely making this up, in my opinion. So Peter, as he grew older, and with him being the eldest surviving son, he would become the main focus and the main target of his father's abuse. Now, in school, he was a very good student. Academically, he did very well. The teachers were always quite impressed with him. But they could almost tell when he was being beaten because there seemed to be these periods that would come and go where Peter's academic performance would just fall flat in its ass. And not only that, but sometimes Peter would be witnessed with bruises on him, which of course indicates that he is being beaten at home. At this point in time, Peter actually finds it better to hang around on the streets, to walk the streets or sleep on the streets rather than going home to his abusive dad. And whilst living on the streets, he would obviously find acquaintances that were involved in petty crime, and Peter himself, he would also participate in this petty crime as a means to basically feed himself and clothe himself. So by the age of 13, Peter, somehow, he was able to land himself a girlfriend. And I mean, 13 is a very young age. It's a young age to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, but usually at that age it's a very innocent kind of relationship. There's nothing sexual going alongside it. You just kind of claim your boyfriend, girlfriend, and I don't know, hug, hold hands, possibly. But at the age of 13, Peter was desperate, and I mean desperate, to have sex. Now, of course, like young boys, hormones, you know, it can all spiral. But 13 is no age to be thinking about having sex. Now, Peter would try and get his girlfriend to have sex with him, but she was very adamant that this wasn't what she wanted. And they sort of came to an agreement where Peter was allowed to fondle her, undress her, but he couldn't do anything else. And this for Peter, he enjoyed doing this, but he needed more. And this is utterly disturbing and it's devastating, and I'm sorry to even have to say it, but this is where animals come into the case in a different kind of way. Because Peter, he would use sheep, pigs, goats to release his urges. And over time, he began to realise that he could actually orgasm quicker and better if he was hurting the animals at the same time. Slashing them, stabbing them. And when that in itself still isn't enough for Peter, if he's not depraved and sadistic enough at the age of frickin' 13, his eldest sister, who his father had been raping, he also attempts on multiple occasions to rape her as well. Now, thankfully, from what I've seen in the records, I don't believe he succeeded in doing this. But what an evil monster to think that you are entitled to do that because you need to release your urges. I honestly wish that someone had put him down at this age. And I know I shouldn't say that. I know that's terrible, but it's true. So by 1897, Peter had officially left school and he would have like a brief apprenticeship where he was doing some work. But I mean, that wasn't doing it for Peter. He just wasn't cut out for work, and he decided, I'm just going to rob the family home and I'm going to flee to Koblenz. And that's exactly what he does. Now, the first adult murder that we have that he possibly committed, okay, but again, this only came from Peter Kürten himself, and I just don't see this jackass as being a reliable source. But he claims that sometime in November of 1899 that he was able to pick up an 18-year-old girl. He then raped her, strangled her to death, and then just left her body laying there. He claimed that doing this was the highest heights of sexual ecstasy. So complete sadism is what we're getting here. Then we come to 1900 and Peter, he would be arrested for fraud. He would then be rearrested that exact same year. Apart from this time, the charges were stacking up a bit because they add on the 1899 robbings that had occurred in Dusseldorf and also an attempted murder charge when he had tried to shoot a young woman. That right there, we should just lock him up and keep him locked up. But that doesn't happen in these cases. It never, ever does. And that's the thing that is so frustrating, because this era of his crime spree, it doesn't show a man who is just involved in petty theft. It shows someone who is escalating day by day, who needs to be locked up, who needs to be kept under some form of control. In October of 1900, he would be sentenced to 4 years in prison, and he would serve this in Dusseldorf. In this period, it actually becomes crucial to his story, because this incubation period just gives him time to think about his fantasies, to develop them further and become even sicker and more depraved. So he would then be released in 1904 and he would join the German army before being sent to Metz. And almost immediately when he arrives in Metz, he takes a look around, scopes out his surroundings and just immediately decides, nah, not for me, and deserts. And what does he do next, I hear you ask? Does he go on to do great things? Does he do something helpful? Does he contribute to society? No. This man proceeds to commit arson attacks. He's setting haylofts, barns on fire. And then after he sets these things ablaze, he literally takes a step back, crosses his arms, watches it as it all unfolds, as if it's his own Netflix special. Just watching all of these firefighters try and scramble and make sure that everyone's safe and try and put out these fires. And whilst we can say, thank goodness no one was hurt in these fires, Peter Kürten, he would later admit that he had started at least 24 fires. And by doing this, he was actually turned on sexually. And that was because he was imagining that homeless people would be burned alive in some of the fires that he was setting. That was the hope. That was the goal. So from 1905 to 1913, he would be imprisoned for these attacks. And during these stretches, because the guy just couldn't behave for love nor money, he would spend a lot of time in solitary confinement, or he would receive these very harsh disciplines. And during this time, it just gave him the peace and quiet that he needed for his sick, depraved fantasies to even further evolve. And they don't evolve slightly, it becomes full-on mass murder, revenge fantasies, to the point where he claimed that these themselves gave him more sexual pleasure than any normal person with any normal sexual fantasies. And this guy, TMI, too much information, Peter Kürten, because he would go on to say that, and I don't know why I'm whispering, no one's here. It's literally, I'm in an empty house. But he said that when he would fantasize about slaughtering people, he would just spontaneously ejaculate. Even if he wasn't diddling down there, it would just happen. It would just go off like a gun. I don't know. Disgusting. Like TMI. We could have done without that information in your case, Peter. And this would bring us to the horrifying day of May the 25th of 1913. So Peter Kürten, he's at his usual shenanigans, right? He's like robbing, and he's robbing a tavern in Mulheim this day. But this time it would escalate in such a horrific way, because now it wasn't about robbing to provide for himself. It was robbing in the hopes that he would find someone to attack, to carry out these fantasies. And whilst he is robbing this tavern in Mulheim, he would discover a 9-year-old little girl just sleeping in her bed. She wasn't interfering with the robbery, she wasn't bothering anyone. She was simply sleeping in what she believed to be the comfort and safety of her own home. But this monster would take away any aspect of comfort and safety that the people of Mulheim had ever known. When he sees this 9-year-old, he can't help himself. He immediately goes over to her while she's sleeping and he starts to strangle her severely in her sleep. And again, this isn't enough. We know this man, he has to escalate with everything. So he takes out a pocket knife and he slashes her throat twice. He then claimed that he had ejaculated over her when he heard her blood hit the floor and when he seen her blood on his hands. I don't even know if there's a word to sum up the kind of evil and depravity that this man is. And I used to say in these cases when I was covering them, I would say that these men or these women, these people who kill, they were complete animals. But see, the truth that you realise the more that you listen to crime, the more you talk about it, is animals would never do this. They wouldn't. But who would do it? Human beings. They are the most dangerous living things on this planet. Humans themselves. And I suppose that is exactly why women always say that they would choose the bear. If you know, you know. Now, I'm sure it's no shock to anyone that murdering this little girl, that wasn't enough for Peter Kürten. Of course it wasn't. He's a freak. He actually decides to go back to Mulheim the next day. He goes to the tavern across the road from the one that he had robbed and murdered Christine in. And the reason that he did this was so he could sit and listen to the locals, maybe even the family, crying, discussing the robbery and murder of this young girl. He revelled in that. But again, even that wasn't enough for him. He would actually visit Christine's grave over a number of weeks. He would fondle and grip the soil of her grave, and when he did this, again, he would ejaculate over this grave of this little girl as if he hadn't done enough. And then just 2 months later, Peter Kürten, he would break into the home of 17-year-old Gertrude Franken, who again was just sleeping peacefully in a place that should have been a safe environment. Now, Peter, he had managed to break in because he had a skeleton key. Now, if you're unsure what a skeleton key is, in simple terms, it's basically a master key that can work in a multitude of different locks. So he had the skeleton key and it had worked on the home of Gertrude. So Peter Kürten, he goes into Gertrude's bedroom, sees that she is sleeping peacefully, sleeping quietly, and he decides that he is going to strangle her. Now, he strangles her so severely that blood starts coming up her throat. It starts spurting out her mouth. And can you imagine what happened to Peter Kürten as he watched the blood come from Gertrude's mouth? Yeah, he ejaculates over her. After this, after he is satisfied, he flees the scene, leaving Gertrude clinging on for dear life. Thankfully, Gertrude would survive, but of course these wounds, the physical and the mental damage that has been done, is going to take her a long time to recover, if she is actually ever able to fully recover from that. And unbelievably and devastatingly, Peter Kürten, he's able to evade capture for the murder of Christine and the attempted murder of Gertrude. And this builds his confidence. It gives him the boost that he needs because he realises, I can do the thing that I love and I can get away with it. Now, just days after the attempted murder of Gertrude, on July the 14th, Peter Kürten, he would find himself being arrested. But like I said, it's not for what he should be arrested for. It's for multiple burglaries and arson attacks. So he would be sentenced to 6 years in prison, but because he can't control himself there and stop being an asswipe, the sentence ended up being extended for a further 2 years. And this 8 years would be served out in a military prison. And whilst you think, oh great, like it'll be stricter, maybe this will help. No, it doesn't. It just gives him longer with his sick and depraved fantasies and a long time to plan how he is going to escalate. So when he's released from prison in 1921, he would relocate to Altenburg to go and live with his sister. Now, when he's there, his sister would introduce him to a woman by the name of Augusta Scharf. And let me tell you, Augusta, she is not just some random love interest. I mean, this woman's pretty well established. She has her own business, she runs her own sweet shop, she's older than him, and she did used to be a sex worker, but now that she has her sweet shop, that is now how she's able to provide for herself. But the only thing with Augusta is she was previously charged with shooting her fiancé, killing him. So I mean, like, you know, it's probably not Peter Kürten's ideal woman to try and calm him down, but, you know, she's got her sweet shop. And Peter Kürten, of course, I mean, he doesn't have a great record himself, but I mean, you know, what he's doing out there is pretty... Well, it's something that you don't tell the person that you're trying to court, shall we say. So he lies to Augusta, he tells her that he was a prisoner of war, and the pair of them, they get married 2 years later. Now, Peter would later say that the only way he could be intimate with his own wife was if he fantasised about violence. Even on their wedding night, he couldn't care less about consummating the marriage and sleeping with her. Augusta had to be the one to initiate this, which, I mean, that's fine, no big deal. But Peter just really couldn't be bothered, and it took him a hot minute to get in the zone, and that's because he had to go to these sick, depraved fantasies to even be able to be intimate with his own wife. For the first time in forever, not to be confused with a Frozen song, but it does seem like Peter Kürten is living somewhat of a normal life, apart from what's going on up here. But at the moment, he's holding down a steady job, he's doing work within the trade union. Socially, he's still a weirdo, still an outcast. He very much keeps himself isolated. No real friendships, no normal connections. But there is that underlying secret behaviour. But outwardly, he seems as normal as he can be. So 1925 comes around and Augusta and Peter, they decide that they're going to move back to Dusseldorf, his old stomping ground. And the minute they're back there, Messy Pete is back in the building, people. He gets himself involved in an affair with 2 different women. We've got Tida and Meg. They would later tell police that any intimacy that they had with Peter, it always involved some form of violence, and most of the time that was strangulation. It was almost as though that was his twisted way of showing affection, and he even later told one of the women, that's what love means. And that in itself is chilling, because that shows you how this man equates violence with intimacy. Now, once his wife Augusta finds out what's been going on under her nose, she actually takes the woman to the police to report Peter. One says that he had tried to seduce her, and another one says that he had actually raped her. Now, unfortunately, this charge of rape, it was never properly looked into and it would be dropped. But Peter Kürten, he still ends up being convicted of seduction and threatening behaviour, which would lead him to a sentence of 8 months in prison. I didn't even know that you could be convicted for seduction back then. Is that still a thing? I don't think so. Is it? So Peter, he ends up serving just 6 months of his sentence, and his early release, it comes with a condition. And that condition is get the out of Dusseldorf. Now, Peter doesn't want to leave Dusseldorf. This is his stomping ground. This is where he thrives in the worst ways possible. So he actually appeals this condition, and somehow, some way, he successfully fights it, meaning that he still gets to worm his way in this place where everything is about to get so much worse. Apollonia Kuhn, she was walking about her day as normal, nothing out of the ordinary, on February the 3rd of 1929. Now, what Apollonia didn't know is that she was being stalked by a sick, sadistic predator. Can anyone name that stalker, I wonder? Yes, of course, that predator was none other than Peter Kürten. Now, Peter, he had done a very good job of not drawing attention to himself whilst he was following Apollonia. He made sure that he followed her enough and waited until any possible witnesses were way out of sight. When he was sure that there was no one there who would be able to stop him or later identify him, he pounced on Apollonia. He dragged her into the underbush and he would start ferociously attacking her. This young woman would be stabbed 24 times with sharpened scissors. Peter then watches her as she is bleeding out and decides that he's just going to flee the scene. But unbeknownst to him, Apollonia, she would survive. And whilst it's incredible that this young woman survives, it's just unfathomable to think of the trauma that she endured. I mean, how would she ever be able to walk by herself and feel safe ever again? And then on February the 8th, because this monster, he doesn't waste any time, he would target 8-year-old Rosa Oliger. He pounced on this little girl and he strangled her until she was in a state of unconsciousness. As soon as she was, he decided to take the same scissors that he had stabbed Apollonia with, and he stabbed This little girl in the temples, her genitals, her stomach, and her heart. And this sick, sadistic, evil monster, he ejaculates, watching this little girl bleed to death. And whilst this is just so heartbreaking and so disturbing that this little girl went through that, even after she has died, he still isn't finished with her. And I just want to say, I'll do a timestamp here if you want to skip this bit. It is only a short detail, but it is absolutely horrific. So if you don't want to hear it, please skip. But this monster, he takes his fingers and he would get his semen on his fingers and use his fingers to put this semen inside a rosa. I honestly, I have no words for that. None at all. But yet again, this monster, he wasn't finished with Rosa. Not yet. He actually would return to her body hours later. He had gasoline and he poured it over Rosa's body and set her on fire. And again, he ejaculated as he watched this girl's body go up in flames. And one thing that's really important to note when it comes to Peter Kürten, although he has been targeting women and young children, he does not discriminate, because he would also target men if that opportunity had arose. Now, Rudolf Scheer, he was 45 years old and he was working as a mechanic when he would encounter pure evil. He would be stabbed over 20 times in the eyes, the head, and the back. And something that is just completely unbelievable in this case is, once Rudolf had died, when the police had found his body, Peter Kürten went to the police site, to the crime scene, and told the police that he had heard about Rudolf's murder over the telephone and he wanted to speak to them about it. He was looking for information. He was getting off on this. Like, the audacity of this fusty little man and his frickin' comb over. Now, unbelievably, I'm going to give props to the police here, right? Because when they're investigating these 3 murders, they actually connect them, which I have to say I wasn't expecting, because there was a child, a woman, then a man. I really thought that they wouldn't put 2 and 2 together, or if they did put 2 and 2 together, it might have gave them like 9, because sometimes that's how the police work in these cases. Not always, but sometimes. It's not all police, but it's always police. But they really quickly link these attacks and they come to the conclusion that it is definitely the same attacker that's committing these crimes. So between the period of March and July of 1929, Peter Kürten, he claims that he had strangled 4 women, even claiming that he had threw one in the Rhine. And yet again, this is where we see that this guy has an awful lot of fantasies and, you know, he's willing to embellish or fabricate completely stories that never actually happened, because investigators could not corroborate any of this. There was no missing persons confirmed that would line up to the dates that he provided. I think he was just hoping to make himself more impressive, although it's not impressive, but in his narcissistic, sadistic, weirdo mind, I think that's what he thought. He seemed to think it gave him some kind of credit. But devastatingly, a murder that he said he committed in August, this wouldn't be a lie, this would be true. And it was just unimaginable horror for the woman, Maria Hahn. So Maria, she had met Peter Kürten on August the 8th. And the way he describes her is in this really gross, calculating manner. He tries to say that she was a young woman who was looking for marriage. And you can just tell with him saying this is him already sizing her up as prey. So he would set up a date with Maria in the Neanderthal area of Dusseldorf. And he would spend hours with Maria acting very normal. Acting, remember, because there's nothing normal about this guy. That must have been exhausting for him, acting like an actual human being. Yeah, tough. But he's acting completely normal. He is trying to reel Maria in. And then he's able to lure Maria to this meadow. And you can imagine he paints it as this romantic thing. They're going to walk by a meadow together. It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. But inside his mind, he was already planning her murder. God, he was planning her murder before they had even met. So Kürten, he unleashes this horrific attack on Maria. And I mean, it is horrifying. He later tells investigators that she was begging and pleading for her life. And she was doing this whilst this monster was switching between strangling her, stabbing her in the stomach and the head. He was sitting on her chest so she couldn't breathe, all whilst waiting for her to just die. But I think what makes this particular murder so horrific is the fact that Maria Hahn, she didn't die instantly. Nothing about this woman's death was quick, and in fact, she would suffer for an hour after this attack. She died very slowly, in agony and complete terror and pain. Peter Kürten is worried that after Maria's murder, because he has blood on her, if it so happens that word about Maria's murder gets out, his wife might suspect that it had been him. So he decides that he's going to bury Maria's body in a cornfield. But that was not the worst part. Because this monster, he doesn't decide, I'm going to dump Maria's body and then I'm going to move on. I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to draw attention to myself or the fact that I have murdered this young woman. He can't help himself. Of course he's going to go back to Maria's body. He actually digs her up with the plan of nailing her to a tree. Her decomposing body, mind you, because it's been weeks. But he wanted to nail her to this tree to almost mock crucifixion, to shock the public. When he's trying to put Maria's remains up onto this tree, he realises he's not strong enough to lift her body. So he just decides that he's going to rebury her again. But of course, being the sick, perverted, idiotic, loser, weaselly predator that he was, he doesn't rebury her before embracing her decomposing body, before caressing it and groping it. And in his own later confession, he actually told investigators that he would go back to Maria's burial site on multiple occasions. And the reason for this is he was making her burial better every single time. I don't even want to imagine what this man was doing, because I feel like it's going to be a rinse and repeat of what he's just done. He said that he felt proud and satisfied every time he went back to that burial site because he was so happy with what he had done. And I think this tells you everything about this kind of monster. It's like the murder isn't the end for him. It seems to just be the beginning. He obsesses over the body being buried or doing something to the body afterward. He's obsessed with the aftermath of murder. Investigators, they would find Maria's body on November the 15th. And you're probably wondering, well, how did they find that if she's buried in a cornfield? How would they know to look there? Well, they received a very detailed anonymous letter that told them exactly where Maria had been buried. Who sent that letter? Guys, I don't know. The mind boggles. I've not got any suspects. Do you, Peter Kurten? So after he is, in his mind, successfully murdered and gotten away with the murder of Maria Hahn, he decides it's time to switch weapons. He's going to switch from his scissors to a knife. And that's not just because he wants to be innovative. This is simply because he doesn't want to get caught. He is literally playing 4D chess with the police, trying to make them believe that, if there's a different weapon, there must be a different perpetrator. And then on August the 21st, he wants to change things up again. And he just goes into full random murderous attack mode. He would attack 3 random strangers, stabbing each of them. There was an 18-year-old girl, a 30-year-old man, and a 37-year-old woman, who were all just going about their day, had no intentions of ever running into this man, and yet evil found them. Thankfully, in these cases, every single one of them, they would survive. But of course, they were badly injured, they were traumatised, and each of them told the police the exact same thing, that this attacker, when he had attacked, he didn't say a word to them. There was no word of warning, there was nothing that took place. He almost did it as a silent robot. A malfunctioning robot, mind you, but a robot nonetheless. 3 days later, Peter Kurten, he goes to a fairground in Flea, and whilst he's here, he decides that he is going to target 2 foster sisters. One is 5 years old, and one is 14. So he's able to trick the older one, Louisa Lenson, by telling her, if you leave, I will give you 20 pfennig if you can buy me cigarettes. Because not only is he a monster, he's a cheap-ass monster. Whilst she is gone, whilst she is away getting these cigarettes, Peter Kurten proceeds to strangle to death 5-year-old Gertrude Hamaker. He would knock her completely unconscious, and then he would slit her throat and just dump her body like she meant nothing. When Louisa finally returns, he would also attack her. She is strangled, she is stabbed repeatedly, he bites her multiple times, he cuts her throat twice, and then he drinks her blood. The blood that was pouring from her neck, he frickin' drinks it. Vampire of Düsseldorf, is it making sense now? Now Louisa, she also dies. But none of these girls were sexually assaulted, which is really weird for Peter Kürten. But this just underlines the fact that it wasn't all about sex, it was about control and brutality. Now, the very next day after these two murders, he would approach a 27-year-old woman by the name of Gertrude Schultz. Now, when he approaches Gertrude, there's nothing secretive about it. There's nothing like incognito that leaves room to the imagination, because he straight up asked Gertrude, "Do you want to have sex?" And Gertrude, of course, having taste in men, says, "Absolutely no thank you, little dusty musty creature. Away you go." But when she tells him no, he snaps. He cannot handle it. He screams in Gertrude's face, "Well, just die then." And he would stab her over and over and over and over, simply because Gertrude rejected him. And I cannot believe this, but this woman is an absolute fighter, because she frickin' survives. Now, unfortunately, because everything happened so quickly, because the attack was so frenzied, my doorbell just went again. Why? I'm not doing it. I'm not answering it. It's a delivery. I hope they leave it in my safe space. I have it on like my record. Please leave in safe space. It's easier for them than coming to the door. I need to get a grip. Why am I scared of going home? Why am I scared of the delivery driver who I've requested deliver my parcel? I need to grow up. Okay, delivery man's away, thank goodness. So anyway, Gertrude survives this horrific ordeal, and she has enough strength to tell the police what has happened. Now, unfortunately, she can't give too much information. The attack was so frenzied, like I said, but she's able to tell the police that this guy was around 40-ish. And honestly, I think Gertrude was being very generous there, because this guy, he has had a hard paper round. He looks rougher than a slice of toast. And by September, this guy, he is still attempting murder. He is still stabbing people, strangling people. Before deciding that, again, it's time to mix it up, try and throw police off the trail, and he decides that he is going to switch his weapon of choice to a hammer. So then on September the 30th of 1929, Peter Kürten, he would meet 31-year-old Ida Rutter in Dusseldorf, at Dusseldorf station. Now, he charms her a bit, and he's like, do you want to go in the cafe? Like, we could have a coffee, we can chat, get to know each other. And Ida doesn't think anything of it. This guy seems really nice from what she can see. But then after the cafe, when they're walking, he then drags her in the Hofgarten. Now, this is near the Rhine. Once they are there, and once he knows that there is no witnesses to see anything that happens, he proceeds to beat Ida with this hammer all around her head. Now, after this, when she is in and out of consciousness, he then rapes her. And he is still picking up this hammer in between this and smashing her across the head, even when she wakes up and begs and pleads for her life. And then on October the 11th, he carries out this exact same routine on a woman by the name of Elizabeth Dorier. She was only 22 years old. He does the whole cafe routine, they go on a walk together, they're walking by the river, when he then proceeds to attack her with the hammer. He strikes her right across the temples with this hammer. He then rapes her. And during this rape, he is then providing more blows from the hammer to her head. Now, Elizabeth's body would be found. She was in a coma at this point. She was rushed to the hospital, and the doctors did everything that they possibly could, but she would die the following day. On October the 25th, this loser, he then tries to attack 2 further women with this hammer, carrying out the same routines. But thankfully, these women, they survive. And what I think shows just how frenzied and desperate these attacks were the fact that the only reason these women survived was because his hammer broke. He was swinging it That hard that his hammer broke mid-cycle. After this, he decides that it's time to switch back to his original method, the one that's always worked best for him. And on this day, November the 7th, he would lure 5-year-old Gertrude Obermann into this secluded allotment type of thing. Once there, he strangles this girl and stabs her 35 times with the scissors. And then he disposes of this little girl like she meant absolutely nothing. He left her in a pile of jagged nettles. Just complete monster behaviour. Meanwhile, whilst he is in the midst of committing these murders and these vicious attacks, Dusseldorf is in complete hysteria. The press were now calling him the Vampire of Düsseldorf. And because the victims were so different, because the methods of killing were so different, the police are now questioning, is this multiple killers? By the end of 1929, they have received 13,000 letters from the public. They've interviewed 9,000 people. They have chased 2,500 different leads. And they've compiled the suspect list that is so massive that it's basically a frickin' phone book of 900,000 names. Now, Peter Kürten, as usual, he starts to get all cocky again. He thinks he is the bee's boss and it's so pathetic to watch. But he decides he's going to write into a newspaper. So this communist newspaper, it would receive this hand-drawn map. And this map points to the grave of Maria Hahn. Not only that, but it also discloses where Gertrude Obermann's body has been left. Now, handwriting analysis, this would be carried out, and this was able to link this particular letter and the previous letters to one individual offender. Now, it would be this renowned investigator by the name of Ernst Gannat who had basically concluded that it was the one offender. Come to 1930, and Peter Kürten, he has stopped murdering for the time being, but he's still attacking people because he's got to remain flexible. Between February and May, a very short window, he actually maims 10 other victims in these non-fatal but equally horrific hammer and strangulation assaults. But the thing is, he's getting reckless now. He's getting clumsy because he's leaving victims, he's leaving witnesses. 10 to be precise here. And they're able to give the police more and more and more information. But the break in the case, this would come on May the 14th when Maria Butlik, she arrives in Dusseldorf. So she gets off the train at Dusseldorf station and she makes it known to people that she is currently looking for work. So she meets this man and he is offering her some help and they go on a walk through the park. But when they're in the park, Maria starts to feel very suspicious about him. There's something a bit dodgy here. And when she's kind of trying to get away from this man, a heroic stranger comes into the midst. Plot twist, this heroic stranger was not heroic. It was Peter frickin' Kürten. Because of course it is. But this heroic stranger, he doesn't seem heroic for too long. Because this heroic stranger, he invites Maria back to his place in Mettmanner Strasse. But Maria clocks right away that this is also very weird. I mean, they've just met, he's kind of helped her. So she declines the invitation. But she's very polite about it. So Peter Kürten, or the heroic stranger, he then says, well, don't worry about that. What I'll do is I'll walk you to a hotel so you've got some shelter for the night. And Maria accepts this. But instead, as you can imagine, what Peter Kürten actually does is lure her into the woods in Grafenberg. He rapes this young woman brutally and then tries to strangle her. But Maria, she's able to scream, and it's the kind of scream that would definitely get the attention of any onlookers or anyone passing by. So Peter Kürten, he gets scared. He lets Maria go and she runs away. Now, sadly, Maria, she never reported what had happened to her, but the powers that be, they work in mysterious ways. So instead of reporting it to the police, Maria wants to confide in a friend. So she actually writes a letter to a friend, but she accidentally puts down the address incorrectly. So this letter to her friend, it can't actually be delivered, and the post office, they then have to open it to see where it was meant to go. They read the contents of this letter, detailing the horrific attack that Maria had went through, and they send it immediately to the police. Now, Ernst Gannat, that sort of like renowned detective I was telling you about, he brings in Maria for questioning. He wants to know what happened to her, who did this to her. And she is able to lead them to 71 Mettmannerstrasse. They go into this building and the landlady confirms that the tenant that they are looking for is none other than Peter Kürten. And just like that, the Vampire of Düsseldorf, he finally has an address. And no, it's no a Batcave for the vampire. Now when Ernst, Gnat and Maria, they go to his apartment, Peter's no in at this point. He's out doing God knows what, probably trying to attack someone else. But he returns when they're still there. But unfortunately, he clocks them in the hallway and does a runner. But this is when he truly starts to panic, and he goes home and he tells his wife Augusta that he had raped Maria Budlik and that he might have to do some hard time for that. And then we arrive to May the 23rd when quite clearly Peter Kürten, he can't handle the scandal anymore. He drops the mask fully and he starts singing like Johnny Cash. He basically turns around to Augusta, his wife, and says, I'm actually the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Don't know if you've heard of him. He's in the news. He's a pretty big sadistic deal. And here's the gag. He actually tells Augusta, you should be the one to turn me in and then you get the reward money. You'll be set up for life. And they say romance is dead, but let me tell you, Peter Kürten's out here proving us all wrong. That's a sarcastic joke, by the way. He is an absolute POS. Now, Augusta, instead of standing by her man, which some women unfortunately do in these situations, she's like, say less, hand me the phone. She gets the phone, she calls the police, she tells them, I know who the Vampire of Düsseldorf is, and I want my money by check. So Augusta and the police, they basically set up this meeting place where they're going to exchange Peter Kürten, and this was outside the St. Rochus church. So Peter and Augusta, they go there, the police are there waiting with guns, and Peter Kürten is arrested at gunpoint. Now once he's in custody, he's not playing hard to get. He's ready and willing to chat at that point. He basically turns around to them and says, since you asked so politely, let me tell you. And he confesses to absolutely everything. And I mean, we go far back. He goes back to the murders of Christine Klein and the attempted murder of Gertrude Franken, which, remember, happened way back in 1913. When it comes to the total confession count, there was 68 individual crimes. This included 9 murders and 31 attempted murders. So, Peter Kürten, Paul, when he is being interviewed by the police and investigators, he tells them that the reason he's committed these crimes is because he feels like life has handed him so many injustices and it's just not fair. So that warrants you attacking innocent children, women and men because life hasn't been fair to you. Okay. Interesting. He would also insist that he never tortured any of his child victims, which is a wild line to draw, but okay. And he did admit that a real driver behind most of what he committed was sexual. He would tell the investigators that even just the sight of blood could cause him to orgasm. And he would even say sometimes to his women victims when he was strangling them, he would suddenly become a bit apologetic after he has ejaculated. He's one of those ejaculate and cry types. But he switches gears, becomes weirdly apologetic and starts telling the women that's what love is all about. Like he would tell to his exes, the 2 women he was cheating on his wife with, them. And he would also brag about drinking his victims' blood. And in particular, he kept bringing up Maria Hahn, saying that he had drank so much of her blood after her murder that he had actually vomited. He even told investigators that previously he had murdered a swan simply to be able to drink the blood from its neck. Because apparently, if you're going to be grotesque, you should be grotesque on every single level. Now, whilst he was waiting for his trial, he would be interviewed extensively by a psychiatrist called Carol Berg. Now, when talking to Carol, he had kind of described his crimes in a way that made them sound like a routine. So the tension builds up. He attacks, he orgasms, he feels relief. He had even said that most of his attacks and assaults would happen whilst his wife was out working the evenings. He also admitted that the amount of stabbing or bludgeoning that took place for each individual victim, depended on how long it took him to finish. Ugh, I can't believe I'm having to say some of this stuff. He had also made it clear that the weapon of choice didn't really matter. As long as this weapon drew blood, it could literally be anything. He said a lot of the times he would add these sexual motives to almost have the police believe that the motivation was lust itself, but later revealing that his true motivation behind all of the crimes wasn't just the orgasm and all of that, it was the blood and the violence. But again, I think that does come back to it being sexual because the blood and the violence is what gets him off. And then he flips the script again because he just goes back and forth, back and forth. So instead of it being about lust and then blood and violence, now we're going back to it being about revenge. And this revenge was him striking back at society because of his childhood. Peter Kürten, do you know how many people out there go through the same sort of childhood that you do and grow into these amazing people who advocate for victims, who never, ever, ever imagine treating anyone that way because they know how it feels? Your childhood was awful, but who you became, that's on you. This man genuinely wanted to be seen as a victim of his circumstances, but also a self-appointed executioner. And I'm sorry, but you can only pick one. The psychologists, they weren't impressed by him at all, and they had actually all reached the same conclusion. And that was the fact that this man, he wasn't insane. He was in complete control of what he was doing. He was well aware of what he was doing, and he was sane. And thankfully, this means that he was fit to stand trial. So Peter Kürten, he would go to trial on April the 13th of 1931. This would take place in Dusseldorf, and the charges he faced, they were extensive. He would face 9 murder charges and 7 attempted murder charges. Now, originally in the trial, he would plead not guilty by reason of insanity. That old chestnut. And what's absolutely hilarious is even the court knew that this room could not remain civil. Everyone wanted a bit of Peter Kürten, and not in a good way. They wanted to hurt this monster, especially the grieving families of the victims. He would spend a majority of this trial inside a heavily guarded iron cage. Kind of makes me think of Andrei Chikatilo. Whilst in the cage, he was always shackled, and the reason for this was to stop any grieving relatives or anyone else in the court trying to attack him. Me personally, I'd turn a blind eye. Like, what's that? You jumped over and stabbed him? I never seen it. So the prosecution, they had laid out the full list of his crimes. The murders, the attempted murders, the rapes, the assaults, everything. They had even talked about his past hobbies. Hobbies like arson, burglarising. A few days into the trial, it does seem as though Peter Kürten comes to his senses because he's like, I don't think this insanity thing's working out. I don't think anyone's buying it. So he suddenly drops the insanity plea and decides that he is going to plead guilty. He had openly stated that he felt absolutely no remorse. He said when he remembers what he has done to his victims, he's not ashamed. He doesn't find it unpleasant. He actually finds them to be very enjoyable memories. When he was asked if he had any conscience of any sort, he basically told them no. When he talks about his confession, he said it wasn't for the victims, it wasn't for their families, it was a last parting gift to my wife. The prosecution, they also brought in multiple doctors, multiple psychiatrists. Every single one told the court the same thing. This man is completely sane. He knew what he was doing. He was in control the full time. The decisions he made were his decisions. Carol Berg, he would describe to the court that the motivation behind these crimes was really just sadism, with a very, very small side plate of revenge and resentment. Now, Kürten's defence, they tried to argue that the sheer depravity of his crimes alone should show people that he's insane. But the experts, they didn't budge. They were clear cut on how they felt about this man and what they've seen from him. After 10 days, the jury, they had deliberated for less than 2 hours. And on April the 22nd of 1931, they found this monster guilty. And thank goodness this man, he would receive the death penalty for the murders that he committed and the attempted murders. And as you can imagine, Peter Kürten, he didn't react, he didn't show emotion, he didn't show that he was devastated by the consequences to his actions. He didn't initially appeal, but he did at one point request a pardon, which would be denied on July the 1st, and that very same evening, he would be served his final meal. Now, his last meal would be Wiener Schnitzel, fried potatoes, and also some white wine. Now, when he was finished, he must have thought he was at a frickin' hotel buffet because he asks them, "Can I have some seconds? Can you have seconds?" What? You're not a pub, Peter. You're going to the frickin' execution chamber. And then on the 2nd of July of 1931 at 6 a.m, Peter Kürten, he would be executed via guillotine at Klingelputz prison. And he walked up to this guillotine without any resistance. And because Peter Kürten had to continue being Peter Kürten, he would ask the psychiatrist one last thing. One thing that was very, very important to him. He had asked that when his head is cut off, will his ears still work even for a couple of seconds so he can hear the blood drain from himself. He said that that moment would be the pleasure to end all pleasures. When he was offered any final words, he simply smiled and said no. And then the guillotine came down, took off his head. End of Peter Kürten, thank goodness. I hope he rots in hell. Hope he gets tortured in hell. I hope he receives everything that he done to his victims down in hell. Now, following his 1931 execution, his head was bisected and mummified. His brain had also been removed and was subjected to forensic analysis to see if they could determine where this behaviour had come from. Now, shortly after the Second World War, Peter Kürten's decapitated head, this was transferred over to America and it is currently viewable on display at Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in Wisconsin. I honestly say that we all buy a ticket, we go, we see his head, and then we just stamp on it. Sorry. I will refrain and restrain myself because that was unprofessional. But as always, before we close out this case, before we end this video today, this case is about bringing awareness to the victims. That is why it is so important to me in every case that I share as many victims' names as I possibly can. Now, unfortunately, in this case, there wasn't any background really of any of the victims, so I couldn't go into the depth that I normally would, but please know these victims, their names, their voices, those are the ones that need to be remembered, the ones that need to be heard. When we discuss these cases, it is not to glorify the monsters. It's actually to tear them down a peg or two and purely remember the victims, their strength, their bravery, everything that they were and everything that they should have become before their life was stolen from them. These videos are done to memorialise the victims, to send thoughts and prayers to the family members, everyone who suffered from that huge loss. As always, I hope wherever the victims are now that they are resting peacefully. I hope any family members who were living through this, who had to endure the torture of losing their loved one in such a horrific way, I hope and pray that they found strength and healing somewhere along the way. But my loves, that is it for another true crime and makeup episode. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today, for enduring such hard topics. But as you know, the way I feel about them is if the victims went through something so horrific, the least we can do is listen to their stories in full, listen with the detail. We don't use abbreviations or silly terms around here like grape and essay. I feel that a lot of the times diminishes what these people went through, and their stories deserve to be told after what they have endured. If you do enjoy my content, please, please, please do not forget to like, comment and subscribe. Get the notification bell on if you haven't already. And if you have subscribed, if you do have the notification bell on, maybe just check that it's still there, because sometimes you tell me that YouTube has unsubscribed you or unnotified you, and we can't be having that. I plan on this year being a big year for the channel, so if you want to keep up, subscribe. It's down there or it's down there. I'm not sure because my camera flips. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I, they can all be found listed down below in the description. Social media handles, Instagram, TikTok. I would suggest that you give me a follow over there because I do update you on my stories, and I am going to get back into posting now that I am on the mend from the chest infection. Don't forget to hype this video before you go. Let me know down below in the comments what case you would like me to cover next. But that is it for today. So on that note, please, please, please remember, be a good person. Do not be a bad person. Stay safe, look after each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!